Disclaimer. In this episode, we will be talking about murder and sexual assault.
So, if you have any triggers, don't watch this video. Viewer discretion is advised.
Stay safe.
Stay nosy. One. Hello, everybody.
Hi, welcome back.
Nice to see you once again. It's been a long time.
A week.
It's been a long time. Anyways, today on our second episode of
I was thinking,
we wanted to get, maybe a little bit more gruesome, maybe a little bit more dark. So we decided to do Unsolved Murder Mystery Cases. We have two different ones here, so you won't get bored and fall asleep.
Yeah.
I'm talking to some of you.
You know who you are.
Mm-hmm. And today's cocktails, we have a Milk and Mystery, which is mine. It'll make sense when I get into it.
And I have Tipsy Nun. Yeah, it will make also sense when I get into it,
It will.
Yeah.
Well, would you like to go first this time, or you want me to go first?
I really just want to know what's in this mysterious milk you got here. I gotta know.
Okay. Well, let me dive into it.
Okay.
The cold case that I'm going to be going over today is called the Cowden family murders. Now, this started with Richard Cowden. He was 28. His wife, Belinda, 22. Their kid, David, who was 5. And their 5-month-old baby, Melissa. And their dog, Droopy.
Oh, they named their dog Droopy. Was there any pictures? Was it like a hound?
Yes, here's the picture of the dog.
Let me see the picture real quick.
He is like a basset hound beagle mix.
Oh, that is so stinking cute. Oh my gosh,
super
guys.
handsome boy.
Oh,
well,
so cute.
They all decided to go camping for Memorial Day weekend in 1994. Not 1994, 1974. Correction. Can't get the facts wrong. So they left.
The 70s. Wow. So you also got something in the 70s.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
So they went from August 30th to September 1st. And they decided to go camping in Copper, Oregon, which, fun fact, it's not real anymore.
Why?
It ended up going underwater, and so it just kind of like went
it's a
right
lake
on.
now, guys.
Yeah, it's Cranberry Lake.
I don't know where the fuck that is.
Oh, well.
Cranberry Lake, guys.
It's Cranberry Lake. Anyways, so, oh my gosh. Anyways, the family lived in White City, Oregon, and Richard, who worked as a logging truck driver. So that was pretty cool.
It makes sense. They're in Oregon. Like, that's most...
Mm-hmm. Oh. The family was said to love to camp, but they didn't originally plan to go camping, actually, that weekend. Richard was planning on hauling gravel for his driveway and was planning to spend the whole weekend doing that job, but unexpectedly decided to take a trip to the Siskiyou Mountains. So that was cool. That was kind of odd for a family, but,
yeah, that's just random. You don't typically just have... Well, okay, hold on. Never mind. I know too many people that just have spontaneous camping trips.
Well, when they got there on September 1st, Richard and David went to the Copper General store on foot around 9 a.m. to buy some milk. They had left shortly after, and that was the last that anybody ever saw of the entire family. That evening, Belinda's mother, who actually lived only a mile away from their campsite, was expecting them for dinner for Memorial Day. And they never showed up. And so after in a little bit of her waiting, she decided to head to the campsite and check everything out. And it was very weird. There was no sign of the entire family. However, the truck was parked. The keys were on the picnic table, along with Belinda's purse, a plastic dish filled with water on the ground, along with Richard's expensive watch and his wallet. There was a diaper bag and a camp stove that was set up, and a carton of milk on the picnic table that Richard and his son had bought earlier that day that was half empty. Weird. Milk.
I think it's interesting that that's like the highlight of this. You're just gonna narrow in on the milk on the table and the picnic. Okay.
Anyways, there was also a pack of Belinda's cigarettes, and the truck was absolutely untouched. However, the only thing missing out of their bags in the truck were their swimming suits.
You think they drowned? What if... Okay. Never mind, keep going.
She's already in here. So after waiting an hour, Belinda's mother decided to call the police because she was like, where the heck are these guys? Like, they're completely gone. And they searched the entire campsite until it was about dark. And then after this, Lieutenant Mark Carez, he took over the case and said that it was delayed for maybe a day, quote unquote, because there was no indication of violence towards the family, because like nothing was messed up, nothing was like, there's no blood, nothing. So they had no reason to think that something bad necessarily happened to them on purpose. Does that make sense? So
Nessie took him.
A state trooper commented that, quote unquote, the camp was so spooky, even the milk was sat on the table.
Okay, we're narrowing it on the milk again, guys.
And it's all about the... that's fine.
What is up with the milk? Why is...
It's a weird thing. It's just... Why is there milk on the table? Who's just going to leave milk out? Nobody.
The same people who are just going to disappear.
Yeah, I guess. I guess. So on September 2nd...
Hold on. I have a theory. What if, like planned this so they could get away from their crummy life?
Okay, well, I was actually just about to dive into that.
Okay.
So,
Sorry.
September 2nd, the family's dog Droopy was found scratching at the general store, but the family was nowhere to be found still. So one of the largest searches in Oregon history was put out for this family. There was the state and local law enforcement, U.S. Forest Tree Service, Oregon National Guard, and hundreds of volunteers. The U.S. Forest Service searched 25 miles of roads and trails along the campsite. Helicopters and planes went over the area with infrared imaging as well. Despite a very large search effort, nothing was ever found except Droopy. The search was called off September 7th. Going into their lives, they had wonderful lives, actually. They were in no debt. They made good money. They had a beautiful family.
Okay, so scratch my theory that they had a crummy life they were trying to get rid of.
There were no reasons for them to disappear, right? So because of the swimming suits, people were like, okay, well, the creek, the creek or the lake. Let's look there. Absolutely nothing was found in the creek or the lake. No bodies, nothing. So 7 months after the family's disappearance, on April 12th, 1975, two gold miners were hiking through the woods near Cranberry Lake when they found a decomposed body of a male tied to a tree about 7 miles from the campsite. And in the cave nearby where the adult body was found, there was a body of an adult woman, toddler, and infant were all found inside this cave. And there were rocks sealing the cave up so that you couldn't, just go see it. The bodies were confirmed to be the family with dental records. So the first theory that happened was, you think that, okay, well, Richard did it. He's tied up to the tree. The rest of his family's in this cave. Like, what happened?
Kind of like a murder-suicide.
Yeah, that's what they thought first. Because
How would he tie himself up to the tree, though?
Huh?
Well, I guess... Sure, it can't be that hard to really tie yourself up to a tree. Never mind.
Belinda and the 5-year-old were shot with a .22 caliber, and baby's Melissa had head trauma, and that's what she died of. It's very unfortunate.
That poor baby. That poor family.
And they actually never found a cause of death for Richard. It's been undetermined. They don't know.
I think best bet. I wonder if he just starved to death.
Yeah, he could have. So they were thinking that Richard killed his own family and then committed suicide, and they were looking for a weapon. If he did do it, there had to be a weapon around, but there wasn't. They never found one. So Lieutenant Mark Kezarkin commented, quote unquote, the whole thing just smacks of weirdo, adding that the police knew a lot they weren't willing to discuss at that point. The police believe that Richard and his son came back from getting milk at the general store, and the family was held at gunpoint by someone they didn't know and driven to where the bodies were found, and at least 3 of them were shot. One family from LA had arrived at the campground at 5 p.m. on September 1st, which was when they disappeared. And while they were taking their little walk in the park that evening, there was a car with a man and a woman inside the pickup truck. Quote unquote, they acted like they were waiting for us to leave, and frankly, they made us nervous, so we moved on. Based on where the cave was located, police had to assume it was a local who was involved. After the family's remains were discovered, a resident of Grants Pass, who was a volunteer for the search of the Cowden family, told police that they searched the cave and they were not there at the time of the search. To confirm this story, the police had him guide them to where he said the cave was, and it was the exact same cave where the bodies were found. So,
we're gone?
So this was before they found them. They did, remember that mass search that they did?
Oh, yeah, okay.
So that cave was searched, and nothing was ever reported. He said that there was nothing in there. Yeah. So the only thing that they
That's
have...
unsettling.
Yeah. The only thing that they have now left for evidence is the single bullet, which was belonging to a Marion manufactured rifle. But after this, the case went cold for a really long time. There was a suspect, we're going to get into him, Dwayne Lee Little, who was actually paroled from Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. That's where we are, buddy boys.
You're gonna give our location. We don't live in Salem, guys. She's lying.
I am lying. That's not where we live.
We don't exist, actually.
It's all an imagination.
Yeah, sorry.
Anyways, on May 24th, 1974...
I just spilled that so hard on myself.
He was incarcerated and was on parole during the Cowden family murder. So he was out of jail by the time this all went down, right? So the reason why he was in prison to begin with is because November 2nd, 1964, he had raped and killed a 15-year-old girl named Orla Phipps. Yep. So police determined that Little was in the Cooper, Oregon at the time of the Labor Day weekend. And his girlfriend actually told law enforcement that she had seen him with a .22 caliber gun during Christmas of 1974, that same year that, yeah.
It's a little spicy.
So after that, he got his parole revoked for that reason. And in 1977, he was paroled again, June 2nd. And in 1980, he picked up a pregnant woman whose car had broken down near Portland, Oregon, sexually assaulted, and beat her. But she did survive, so thank goodness for that.
That's so rough.
He was convicted of attempted murder and was served with 3 consecutive life sentences. He has never discussed any of the murders that he has been accused of. But the police believe that the 2 people in the truck that were reported by the LA couple were Little's parents. The truck matched the description of the couple that the couple gave. The parents denied ever knowing anything about the case. However, a minor who is also a cabin owner stated that the family signed into the cabin September 2nd, 1974. Their signatures in the little guest book, actually. And an inmate that Little had, who was also his cellmate, claimed that Little had admitted to these murders of the Cowden family. And the case continues to be unsolved for about 4 decades.
Okay, well...
Family just poof. And then...
We know who did it. Yeah. We know who did my case. But my case is really long, guys, and it gets intense. And I'm sure that several of you have heard it. We are going to dive into the murder of Catherine Sesnick. So... Starting off, on November 1969, Father Joseph Maskell, the chaplain of Archbishop Keough High School, called a student into his office and suggested they go for a drive. And the student was Jean Hargaden Wenner, a 16-year-old girl at the all-girls Catholic school. And she followed him to the parking lot and got in his car with him. And this is what she looks like today. And this is the priest during the time that he was the counselor at the school. The burly charismatic priest, who was then 30 years old, had been the chief spiritual psychological counselor at Keough for 2 years and was well known in the community. And it wasn't unusual for him to give rides to the girls, like to go home or to go to appointments or things like that. So that wasn't anything new. Nothing suspicious there to anyone at the school. I think it's suspicious as hell, but whatever. However, this time he didn't take her home. He took her to the outskirts of the city, to a garbage dump that was very far from any homes or businesses, and this is where Wenner walked up and saw Catherine's lifeless body laying there. This is Catherine Sesnick. I tried to find some of the crime scene photos, but you can't understand what's going on in them, so I thought it wasn't really worth it. But a week prior to this, Kathy, the popular young nun who taught English and drama at Keogh, had vanished while on a Friday night shopping trip. People from all over Baltimore County helped the police comb local parks and wooded areas for any sign of her. And when Wenner saw her, Sesnick was still dressed in the same clothes she was last seen in, and maggots were crawling on her face. And Wenner cried to Maskell, asking him to help her get the maggots off of her face. And instead of doing anything like helping her, Maskell got uncomfortably close to her ear, really close. And he said, you ready here? You see what happens when you say bad things about people? Yeah, I know. Anyways, this is Wenner. When she was in school, this is her.
So he just took this random girl to this dump?
Yep.
Where the dead body was?
Yep.
And he whispered some creepy shit in her ear?
It doesn't
fucking
hold on. No, there's more into it, because fingers point, like, obviously, yeah, he had something to do with it, but he's not the one who did the crime, I don't think. But anyways, hold on. It gets even more intense, and there's a reason he told this specific girl this. So it gets intense. 2 months later, the police announced that a pair of hunters passing through a dump outside of Baltimore had stumbled upon the body of the missing nun. She had choke marks on her neck and a round hole about the size of a quarter in the back of her skull. An autopsy had confirmed that she had been killed by a blow from a blunt object, probably a brick or a hammer. A group of girls from the high school had launched their own investigation, but this happened way later than it should have. But whatever, they're working on it now. They're still getting stuff. So Sesnick lived in an apartment in Southwest Baltimore with another nun, Helen Russell Phillips, and around 7:30 p.m. on November 7th, 1969, Sesnick told her roommate, Helen Russell, that she was going to swing by the bank and then shop for an engagement gift for her cousin. According to the media reports from the time, she had cashed a $255 check, and then she drove to the Edmondson Village Shopping Center where she bought buns at Mully's Bakery. And this is the little map for what they've got going on. Here's her house. Mm-hmm. Just a little map. Anyways, later that night, her brand new green Ford Maverick was found unlocked and illegally parked a block from her apartment, which is weird because, one, she's a nun. She's not doing illegal stuff. Two, she had a designated parking spot at her apartment.
Why would she need to park anywhere else?
Yeah. Especially if it's, like, that close to her apartment.
Yeah.
So, anyways... So during this hunt for her, there were 35 policemen and 5 dog teams, and they combed a 14-block section of Southwest Baltimore from dawn to dusk, and they found nothing. Absolutely nothing. And the man who was assigned to investigate the disappearance was Nick Giangrasso, a homicide detective. And he led the investigation for 3 months while she was missing, but then he later had to give the case over to Baltimore County because she was found outside of his city limits. However, he spent enough time on the case to feel like something suspicious was going on between the police department and the church. Yeah. He said it was clear to him from the fact that the car had been deposited back to her apartment complex without any signs of struggle that she had not been the victim of a random robbery or assault. It looked too clean. It had to be someone who knew her. Mm-hmm. And the first person of interest in the investigation was Jared Koob, Jesuit priest. Koob was one of the priests that Sesnick's roommate had called when she realized the nun had not returned from her shopping trip, and he had been the one to call the police to report her missing.
Was he the one that drove to the...
No.
He wasn't the first suspect?
No, the guy, well, the cops don't know about this. Like, they do not know about this for a long time because this terrified girl doesn't talk about it because you'll see why. So, So he was in a romantic relationship with Sesnick at the time, before he was ordained and before she had taken her final vows. He had asked her to marry him, but she had turned him down. And they continued to spend time together. And 3 days before she disappeared, Coop called her from a Catholic retreat to tell her that he still loved her and he was prepared to leave the priesthood for her and hoped she'd leave the nunhood for him. And he said, if you decide to leave, we'll leave and get married. Yeah. So police brought Coop in for questioning, but he had an alibi for the night that Sesnick disappeared. He and a fellow priest had gone to dinner in downtown Baltimore, and they watched Easy Rider at a movie theater afterwards, and they had receipts to prove that that was what they were doing. And he also passed 2 lie detector tests. At first, I thought this guy was a little suspicious. Well, no, at first I was like, oh, no, it's not this guy. And then I read a few different articles, and I was like, oh, it could be him. But I don't think it's him, guys. I don't think it's Coop. So Harry Bannon, another retired Baltimore City homicide investigator, told the Baltimore City paper in 2004 that he thought Coop knew more about the murder than he was admitting, but that the church forced him to back off the priest. The church lawyers stepped in and they talked to the higher ups at the police department, and they told the detectives and stuff, either charge Coop with a crime or let him go. Stop harassing him. So they let him go. And that was, they were like almost positive that Coop knew more than he was letting on, but whatever. Coop said he had no information that could have been helpful to police when they were asking him who he thought did it to Kathy. He just told them he had no clue. Giangrasso still had a gut feeling that she had been murdered with someone with ties to the church. He personally thought it was in-house within her social network, the priests and the religious order. He interviewed half a dozen priests who knew her as his investigation continued, there was one particular name who kept coming up, and that was Father Maskell. That was the guy who took the girl to the dumpster. Father Maskell.
Sketch guy.
Yep. He looks evil too. He just looks evil. Anyways, Giangrasso wanted to interview Maskell a number of times about the disappearance, but the priest always managed to elude him, and he was always busy and never available. And it got to the point that he was the number one guy that they wanted to talk to, but they could never get access to him, pretty much.
Why?
They never had a chance. Because he's a priest. He can do whatever the fuck he wants. The church will cover it up. Doesn't matter. Anyways, hold on. In Baltimore in 1969, Giangrasso said it was very difficult, if not impossible, to investigate a Catholic priest for any crime. The Archdiocese of Baltimore is the oldest in the United States, and the church considers it to be the premier Catholic jurisdiction in the country. And the Baltimore City prosecutors have charged only 3 of the 37 Baltimore priests who have been accused of sexual abuse since 1980. And just 2 of those priests were convicted, and one of those convictions were overturned in 2005. So, yeah. Anyways, Maskell in particular was a difficult target at the time because he served as the chaplain for the Baltimore County Police, the Maryland State Police, and the Maryland National Guard.
Jeez.
So he knew places.
Yeah.
People. He knew people in higher places.
Can't go wrong there.
I guess not. Obviously not. Anyways, Maskell kept a police scanner and a loaded handgun in his car, drank beer with the officers at a local dive bar, and often went on ride-alongs with his police friends at night to respond to petty crimes or catch teenagers making out in their cars. Bob Fisher, the owner of an automotive repair shop in southwest Baltimore where Maskell took his car on his days off, said that the priest would boast about his police privileges. He'd say, "I'd hear something on the scanner," and we'd jump in the car and take off. So, you know. Maskell's older brother, Tommy, was also a hero cop who had been shot and injured while trying to stop a robbery. So going after Maskell would mean violating the unwritten rules by which the police operated. We're a police family, which the cops involved, the family's involved. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to help the guy out, and we found out that Maskell's brother was a lieutenant. They knew they had a problem. So Giangrasso remembers feeling pressure from his superiors to leave the priest and other members of the clergy alone. I felt like the church was coming in, and he said that he felt like the church was coming in and interfering, and the chain of command was coming down and checking on him. Like, how much longer are you going to be playing with this case, as if to say, you got to back off and move on?
Suspicious.
Anyways, because Sesnick's body was found outside of his jurisdiction, it's weird because where her body was found was in Baltimore County, where Maskell was chaplain. So it was no coincidence, obviously. But nevertheless, he had to turn the case over to the Baltimore County Police, and the county police never charged anyone.
Of course they didn't. Why would they?
Why?
That means they'd be doing their job.
The case remained cold for 2 decades. Then in 1994, 2 women came forward with bombshell accusations against Maskell that tied him to the young nun's murder.
Not surprising.
Anyways, identified in the court documents at the time only as Jane Doe and Jane Roe, the woman accused Maskell of raping them when they were students at Keogh. The woman filed a civil lawsuit against Maskell, the Archdiocese of Baltimore, the School Sisters of Notre Dame, who ran Keogh, and the Baltimore gynecologist named Dr. Christian Richter, seeking $40 million in damages. Jane Doe and Jane Roe's real names were revealed after Maskell passed away in 2001, and their names are Jean Wenner, which I've talked about a little bit already, the girl that got taken to the body, and Teresa Lancaster. Wenner, who claimed Maskell had taken her to see Sesnick's body before it was discovered by hunters, proved details about the body that were only known to the investigators at the time. So she did
see it?
Yeah. However, they were initially skeptical of her claim that there were maggots on her face because maggots are usually not present in cold November temperatures. But the autopsy showed that there were in fact maggots in her throat. So, Wenner said that for decades she had buried most of her memories of what went on at Keogh. And she started to remember the sexual abuse and bits of what went on at Keogh. Beginning of 1992, when she saw side-by-side pictures of Maskell and the school's director of religious services, Father Neil Magnus. This guy. He also looks evil. He is also evil. We don't like him. Gross. Anyways, she saw the body, like the pictures in her high school yearbook, and her whole body like shook, and she knew. So although Lancaster had always remembered most of the abuse that occurred at Keogh, she too had managed to repress some of the details until her mother died in 1993. She says she avoided thinking and talking about the abuse while her Catholic mother was alive because she knew the information would devastate her. But around the time of her mother's death, Lancaster started thinking about all the horrific things she had experienced in high school. She sat up in bed one night screaming, is what her husband had stated in a recent interview. Also, they made a note in the article that was like, survivors sometimes misremember details of traumatizing events, but Lancaster and Wenner's accounts were corroborated by court records and an interview with 8 other Keogh students, 4 who claimed they were abused by Maskell, and another 4 who say they were able to fend off his advances. And Sean Kane, a spokesman for the Archdiocese of Baltimore, said the church now acknowledges that Maskell was credibly accused of sexual abuse of minors. Former Keogh students said that in Maskell's office and in the nearby rectory where he lived, the priest would offer girls a relaxed, open-minded environment where they could talk freely about sex and drugs, drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes on his red velour sofa, and ask for help dealing with their traditional Catholic parents. At the peak of sexual revolution, Maskell was well positioned to exploit the experimental and rebellious atmosphere of the late 1960s and the early 70s. In a confusing time, he offered an intoxicating cocktail of spiritual guidance, hypnosis, booze, pills, and himself. Yeah.
I think most of them could have gone without the him part.
So he started at Keogh as chaplain in 1967, 2 years after it had opened, and he was also the school's, I already said that. He later earned an advanced degree in psychology from the prestigious Johns Hopkins University.
Psychology on how to Lure women.
Former Keough students said that Maskell used his charm, psychology training, and moral authority to first disarm the young girls, then to manipulate them into sexual relationships.
Look at that. It's like he's a type or something.
He targeted struggling or badly behaved students. Hoskins and Schaub, who both got straight A's, said he never bothered them. Asking the girls if they were having problems at home or if they'd been sexually active with their boyfriends or used drugs. Sometimes the priests would use repetitive phrases, I only want what's best for you, just what's best for you, and to coax them to talking, you know. Lancaster said that when she was a junior in 1970, she went to Maskell's office to talk to him about some problems at home. Her parents had found a joint in her bag, and they didn't approve of the long-haired boy she was dating. And it was the middle of the day, and Maskell invited her into his office and shut the door behind her. He then proceeded to strip her clothes off and forced her to sit on his lap, naked, and told her that he was touching her in a godly manner. Yeah. He said, I'm not supposed to do this, but I find that I can really help people when I have physical contact. Often the girls obviously didn't realize that they were being groomed and raped and sexually assaulted for months until, or like years after, because, you know, in that time being the manipulation, you're a young girl.
Trauma is real.
Yeah, yeah. Anyways, Lancaster believed for a short time that she was in a romantic relationship with the priest. Sometimes he would play Irish music while he was with her, almost like it was a sick date. Lancaster said there was about a month or so when she actually thought he loved her. And she said, if there's some kind of love there, then there's sense to all of this. When I found out other people were going in there, I wondered if he loved all of them too. Yucks. Lancaster's Maskell threatened to have her expelled for drugs and sent to Montrose School for Girls, a juvenile facility in Reisterstown, Maryland, once or twice, she said. And he smacked her around and showed her the loaded handgun he kept in his desk at school, and he let her know that I either went along with whatever he wanted to do or it was gonna be worse than I could ever imagine. Yeah. So when Maskell spotted a girl who seemed trouble or was engaged in bad behavior, he would start calling her out of class over the loudspeaker for therapy in his office. One girl reported, I would be in class and it could be any time. I heard my name over the loudspeaker. Report to my office now, and I would have to report to Maskell, said Donna von den Bosch. And she remembered being in class just crying, don't make me go, don't make me go. And the teacher pulled me out in the hall and said, we all know he's a weirdo, but you have to go.
They just, like, knew this?
They didn't know he was doing these things. They just got weird vibes from him. You know, they didn't know. Anyways, Wenner said she went to see Magnus, the school's religious services director, that second guy that I showed you, for confession when she was 14 years old because she had been feeling guilty about sexual abuse she experienced as a young child. You're going to hate this part. The priest turned to her in the confessional, quizzed her on the details of the abuse, and began masturbating as she talked. She said after that, Maskell and Magnus would call her into their offices for joint counseling sessions, which they said was for the purpose of helping her find God's forgiveness for what she did as a child. She says they would masturbate in front of her, take nude photos of her, and force her to perform sex acts as part of her spiritual healing process. I thought they were literally praying for me, she said. Maskell began calling Wenner out of class and into his office without Magnus, and he would show her pornography, tell her that he was trying to help God forgive her for the abuse she suffered as a child, and then he'd rape her. He kept saying it didn't seem like I was open to the Holy Spirit and God's grace. I was just doing what I was being told, thinking I must be such a horrible person that God can't forgive me. The women recall that Maskell had a gynecologist friend, Dr. Richter, who would examine them to make sure they weren't pregnant. Lancaster claims Maskell took her to see Richter for a pregnancy test and then raped her on the table while Richter performed a breast exam. Fisher, the auto repair shop owner, said Maskell boasted about taking high school girls to the gynecologist when he dropped his car off at the shop in the afternoons. He would say, me and the doctor would take them back and give them exams and check them. There's no question, he was always involved with the exams. That he made clear.
What?
Richter, who died in 2006, denied having abused the girls in an interview with the Baltimore Sun during the court battle over the 1994 lawsuit, but he admitted that he may have let Maskell into the room during their pelvic exams. It's possible he may have been in the examining room in the absence of parents. I don't know, maybe to calm the girl. It was very possible he might have come in the examining room. She was 16. She probably had a good deal of faith in him. Maskell's trips to the gynecologist reflected a fixation with the practice, and Lancaster said he liked to perform pelvic exams on the altar of the school chapel and administer vaginal douches, enemas, and anal suppositories in the bathroom of his office and in the rectory. Multiple other girls have also said they were on the receiving end of the mock gynecologist exams and enemas. It was a way to establish further authority over the girls, the creation of doctor-patient relationship, while acting out whatever fetishes inspired the abuse. The woman rarely fought back because they were terrified of him. However, Von den Bosch said she gathered the courage to struggle once during her senior year, and it did not go well. She said, "I thought he isn't going to kill me and have blood all over his floor and have to explain that, so I took my pocketbook and I started hitting him." Van den Bosch threatened to report Maskell, and he responded by putting the barrel of his gun in her mouth. He said, "You're a troublemaker. You're trash. Nobody would ever believe you," he said. "Look at my degree. I went to school at Johns Hopkins." She decided it wasn't worth the risk to report Maskell to authorities, and she became suicidal in high school, but her classmates suspected what was going on. And it was such a big thing. Like, I don't know how no one really made any more things about this, because it was such a big thing that there was a group of girls known as Maskell's girls. And that's what Von den Bosch's friends would call her, one of Maskell's girls. This is her now. She's a doctor. Anyways, several of the women who spoke to the Huffington Post about Maskell's abuse described the priest setting up what amounted to be like a full-on brothel. Wenner said that during her senior year, Maskell began driving her to St. Clement Church, where he preached after school, and that a string of men abused her in his office there. She did not know who the men were, but they referred to each other by generic names: Brother Ed, Brother Ted, and Brother Bob. She said some of the men gave Maskell money in exchange for the abuse. He was prostituting us. To keep Wenner quiet, Maskell reinforced the idea that she was participating in the sex acts of her own accord. He referred to the abuse as Wenner's extracurricular activities and the men as her dates. She says that the priest once pressed his unloaded handgun into her temple and pulled the trigger and warned her that her father, a policeman, would do the same thing, but with bullets in the gun, if he had found out she had been whoring around with older men. Lancaster, Wenner, and Von den Bosch all recall uniformed police officers participating in the abuse, both in Maskell's office and outside of school. So, 2 more former Keough students and a 3rd woman who attended St. Clement Church said in interviews that Maskell abused them as teenagers, often with other men. She said, I remember the back door light coming through and policemen wearing dark pants, a white shirt, and a badge coming in the back door, she said. And she said she felt unusually groggy that day. She woke up in Maskell's office in the afternoon after having been there for hours, and her shirt was buttoned up differently than she had buttoned it that morning. She said Maskell once handed her what she assumes was a spiked drink at an outdoor Catholic youth organization picnic when she was 14, led her away from the other freshman students at dusk, and stood by as a black-haired uniformed policeman raped her in a remote area of the park. "I felt drugged," is what she said. Wenner said Maskell would stand by the door and act like he was protecting her from being caught. One time, Wenner says he became angry at her for acting scared in front of the men because she was supposed to act like she was having consensual sex with them. "He pushed my face into a mirror and he said, you look at who the whore is in the room. Don't ever act like you're afraid," she said. Yeah. Imagine being said that.
I don't know about you. If I was ever in this situation, I probably would have snapped.
Yeah, the only person who tried to help the girls was Sister Kathy Segnick. Wenner said that in 1969, at the end of her sophomore year, Sesnick stole a moment along with her in their classroom. "Are the priests hurting you?" the nun asked gently, and Wenner nodded her head, too afraid to open her mouth, and Sesnick told Wenner to go home and enjoy the summer. She said she would handle the situation. Kathy Hobeck asked Sesnick to protect her from Maskell's abuse when she attended Keough in 1968. "She would make excuses for me when he would ask me to come down. She'd say she's in study and she can't get away, or she'd make up a story," Hobeck said. In the fall of 1969, Sesnick left Keough and took a new job at Western High School, a public school in Baltimore, but she still maintained close ties with the former students who visited her apartment regularly. Maskell remained a frequent topic of conversations for some of them. 2 days before Sesnick disappeared, Hobeck and a classmate visited Sesnick at home, and the nun asked whether Maskell was still bothering them. The girls told her no, that he had stopped. Well, maybe. Wenner said that despite Sesnick's promise to intervene with Maskell on her behalf, the priest continued to abuse her after she returned from summer break, even more violently than before. Another former Keough student visited Sesnick at her apartment the night before she disappeared to discuss the abuse going on at the school. In the middle of their conversation, this woman stated that Maskell and Magnus barged into Sesnick's apartment without knocking. Maskell glared at me, she said, and he knew why I was there. The woman said she left Sesnick's apartment at that point, and the following day at school, Maskell called her into his office with a gun in his hand. He warned her that if she ever told anyone about the abuse, he would kill her, her boyfriend, and her entire family. "That I remember as though it happened yesterday," she said. And Sesnick vanished that night.
Are you kidding me? This man did it.
In June of 1992, more than 2 decades after Sesnick's murder, Wenner reported her abuse allegations against Maskell to the Baltimore Archdiocese. Kane, the director of communications for the Archdiocese, said that the church temporarily removed Maskell from ministry for psychological evaluation in October 1992. 5 months after Wenner reported him, and Maskell had left his job at Keough in 1975 and was working as the pastor of Holy Cross Church about 4 miles from the high school at the time. Maskell was referred for evaluation and treatment over the next several months, Kane said, during the time that the Archdiocese attempted to corroborate the allegation, which Maskell denied by seeking out any additional victims on its own. And though the attorney representing the individuals who initially came forward after months of trying to unsuccessfully to corroborate the allegation, the Archdiocese returned Maskell to the ministry. So he just scot-free, still working. Oh, whatever. Wenner's attorneys circulated a letter to the Keough alums in 1993 and placed an ad in the Baltimore Sun asking if anyone remembered the abuse happening at school in the 60s and 70s. And more than 30 women, including Lancaster, came forward with first and second-hand stories of sexual abuse. According to media reports, Lancaster's story was so compelling that Wenner's attorneys invited her to be a co-plaintiff in the civil lawsuit against Maskell, Dr. Richard, the church, and the order of nuns that ran Keough. Maskell and Richter both denied the abuse, and in 1995, after a high-profile trial, the case was thrown out the court on a technicality. According to Maryland law, victims of sex abuse have 3 years from the time the abuse ends or from when they discover it to file a civil lawsuit. However, the women's attorneys had argued that because Wenner and Lancaster had only recently started remembering some of the abuse, they were still within the 3-year period. Memory impairment often follows trauma, and I've had many such cases, is what they argued. The church brought in a false memory expert, Catholic psychiatrist, Paul McHugh, who successfully argued in the courtrooms throughout the 1990s that memories of child sexual abuse cannot be repressed and then recovered. At that time, there was major backlash against the concept of repressed memory, but we've since learned that that's not true.
Yes.
Judge Hillary Kaplan said that he found the woman credible, but he decided after hearing McHugh's testimony that recovered memories could not restart the statute of limitations. The experts testified, and I found that the memory was not sufficient to justify the plaintiff's case. So, nothing happened there. Big surprise. The women didn't win in court. However, it did make the police interested in Maskell, and they started to investigate him for rape and murder more.
Thank goodness.
And the search for evidence came up empty until a Baltimore grave digger named William Story called police with a tip. Story, the groundskeeper at Holy Cross Cemetery, said Maskell had ordered him to dig a 12 by 12 foot hole in the graveyard in 1991 so the priest could bury a truckload of confidential files in it. The gravedigger produced a hand-drawn map indicating the location of the documents in August of 1994. The police exhumed these boxes, which were mostly filled with psychological evaluations of the Keough students. However, one of the boxes also contained nude pictures of underage girls, which would have been evidence to arrest Maskell for possession of child pornography. But guess what?
What?
Those pictures never made it to the evidence room. Never. They inexplicably vanished after the graveyard dig, and the Baltimore Sun reported only that Maskell's buried boxes contained psychological test evaluations and canceled checks.
They vanished?
They inexplicably vanished.
It was one of the police that was taking part in the abuse of the young girl's bed.
Bet. Judge Kaplan says the photos were never submitted as evidence and that he never even heard of them. Yeah. Yeah! The detective working the case said that as soon as he started looking into the Cesnik case, he received a phone call from one of his superiors in the police department. You ready? He said, "Listen, kid, this is a career buster. We knew who the hell killed her back when it happened, and you'll find out, and you're gonna find out things you shouldn't find out. Let it go." So before police could question Maskell in 1994, he checked himself into a residential treatment facility, claiming he needed help coping with stress and anxiety the case had caused him. Weeks later, he quietly checked himself out, and he fled to Ireland.
He fled to Ireland?
And the archdiocese did not learn that he was living in Ireland until Bishop contacted them in July of 1996. So he went a while without them knowing where he was. Law enforcement dropped the investigation once Maskell fled the country, and he died without ever being charged with a crime. Yeah. Magnus
fucking disgusting.
Had died years earlier in 1988, and Richard died in 2006, like I stated earlier. Gemma Huskins had a hunt for answers about Cesnik's murder, and she began it the summer of 2013 when she reconnected with Nugent, who had interviewed her about Cesnik years earlier. Nugent suspected that the Cesnik story had more tentacles than anyone realized. He interviewed a few retired detectives who confirmed they had been pressured to back off the Catholic priests during their investigations. It seemed apparent to me that some of this was covered up.
Some of it was covered up.
Oh, some of it. Oh. Anyways, Hoskins started by seeking out more women who might have been victims of sexual abuse at Keough. And she logged onto the official Facebook page for Keough alumni and asked whether anyone knew of such abuse taking place at the school in the late 60s and 70s. Or early 70s. The page started buzzing. Women who had been silent for years came forward with stories of abuse by Maskell and others, and when Hoskins mentioned Cesnik's murder, all hell broke loose. Some Keough alums accused her of launching a witch hunt, and school administrators kicked her off the Facebook page for posting inappropriate content. Hoskins had attracted attention of a few like-minded women, though, including Schaub, who had long suspected the sexual abuse at Keough was somehow connected to Cesnik's murder. The women created their own private Facebook group where the discussion could continue, and those only conversations eventually evolved into a full-on murder investigation that hundreds of people are following. In the 2 years that the women have been investigating Cesnik's murder, they have chased at least a dozen leads. They looked into possible connections between Cesnik's murder and the murder of other young girls in the area around the same time. They requested all the files from the Baltimore police and the FBI related to those cases. They tracked down the descendants of Story, the gravedigger, and contacted all the teachers and administrators they could find who worked at Keough in the late 60s. And they dug up property records for the dilapidated rectory where Maskell lived. And they interviewed the neighbors, hoping the house still contained some incriminating evidence, but I don't think they found anything. The women have zeroed in on a suspect they believe participated in Sessnick's murder. I did not get a name, unfortunately. They interviewed several of the man's family members, obtained all of his old police records, and discovered that the police considered him a person of interest in the Sessnick case in the 1990s. But they are still searching for a piece of evidence that might prove he was involved. In September 2014, Wenner returned to Baltimore County Police Headquarters to tell cops her story for the first time since the 1990s. And 4 months later, Dave Jacoby, the detective currently assigned to the case, drove to New Jersey to question Gerard Koob about the murder. And Koob said he had no new information for the detective and was confused even by the visit. And when... There was another statement by Lancaster, and she said that Father Maskell picked me up, took me to a wooded area where there was lots of policemen gathered around, and he left me in the back of the seat, and 2 policemen abused me while Maskell stood next to the car. Anyways, so that is the disappearance of Catherine Sessnick, but really it's just this whole case about how this guy's a
terrible human being.
Garbage. Well, I need to chug this real quick.
And that was the second episode of I Was Thinking. Stay safe. Stay curious.
Stay fucking nosy, guys.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye!
1, 2, testing.
Your mom's got big old titties.